Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Thrive in Tech. Today's guest is Brandon Robinson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure.
So, to kick things off, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what you do in tech and how you got there?
Sure. I'm a sales engineer. I've been a sales engineer for a little while, and it's kind of a unique position. I'd never really heard of it, right? So it's essentially someone who's technical and personable at the same time. A lot of people hear sales engineer and they think, oh, you have to really sell. Well, in reality, you're just positioned in technology and helping people prove it out. And that's really it. So how I got there is a bit of a unique story. I used to work at a place called Barracuda Networks, and I was in tech support.
Mhm.
I was leading a team, and well, really two, but unofficially, I was leading a team inside of tech support. And I happened to have a case where we used to have this thing called like a web filter. This was like a physical device. So we had this dude um, who was very difficult, and they didn't really want to deal with him because he was black and they didn't know how to deal with him. But me being black, it was easy to relate to him, so I essentially got assigned to him. Well, his box went down, and they didn't want to fly somebody out from Cali, so they just sent me. I had no clue what I was actually doing because I'd never seen the box before,
Mhm.
but I figured it out. And then when I got back, somebody's like, "Hey, how'd you like to do this? And be a sales engineer? You can travel, blah blah blah." And I was like, "Sure." That's how I got to be a sales engineer.
Nice. You just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and I just happen to be a people person, so I talk to everybody in the office. So I think they kind of picked up on it.
So I think when people talk about tech careers, they don't focus enough on those people person skills, um, or really any soft skills. But how are you able to find a role, you being a people person, how are you able to kind of identify like, oh, okay, maybe, being able to talk to people to sell things is what I should be doing?
Yeah, honestly, it's like the role found me. And
Mhm.
and I used to tell people hey, it was like created for me. I've been a talker my whole life, but I've also
Mhm.
been smart. So I was one of the people who in school, the teachers would be like, "Hey, when you grow up, you're going to struggle." Shout out, I didn't struggle, but because I would do my work and just talk. And fast forward to being in tech, I happen to be I was very smart, but it's also, very personable. So I interact with people, and that's really what the role needs. You need somebody who can talk to somebody, but you also
Mhm.
need somebody who's smart enough and who likes and has a passion for technology. And so that was me. And the people who were in that role, they kind of saw that. And so they
Mhm.
recruited me to the role because I had never, like many, never heard of it. Right. Um, and so once I got in there, it didn't take long to learn like the sales process and any of that stuff. Like because it was basically what I've been doing my whole life. It was like, oh, it's just my personality. Like I just get paid to be me. So
Mhm.
it was for me, it was pretty easy. It was just them finding me really because I had not I never heard of it, of the role.
So when you say they found you, were you recommended by like a mentor or something or a manager?
It was like a group of people who I had no idea that were recommending and working behind the scenes. I mean, shout out to God for having those people look out for me. I can just say it was him, but it was a group of people. It was a good one of my coworkers. His name was Coca. We used to call him Coca. So he was backup sales. So it used to be like a storage, archiving, and backup. So it was him. It was a dude in California who was over the security stuff, and it was like like a dude who's like a general manager who we bought the product from. Like they all were like working behind the scenes, oblivious to me. Like I had no idea, right? Like they've been having these discussions, but they kind of would see like because they had poached a few people from support before.
Mhm.
So you kind of see like, hey, this might be a great fit. And they were looking to add a security person, so I actually end up training like the guy who I was essentially who kind of taught me like the ropes of being an SE. So I trained him on the technical stuff and he trained me on the sales stuff.
Nice.
So it kind of went like that. Now,
Nice.
I did have like a mentor because Barracuda to me was cool, but like, you know, the next job was like my big boy job. And for that, I would say I had a mentor and he was, you know, he taught me like the sales process because he was an outside, you know, true sales engineer. And he kind of taught me like the process, what to do, et cetera. And I used all of that to get the next job I had.
How did you identify or find a mentor? I think that's probably the number one question I see on tech Twitter.
Mhm.
And there is some good advice and some very bad advice.
Yeah.
People slide in my DMs a lot, like, can you mentor me? And I'm like, I don't know you.
Yes. Yes.
So how did you find your mentor?
Yeah, it's just kind of a natural thing. Like, and I think that's what people, to your point, like there are a lot of ways you can find a mentor. But it naturally developed because he was somebody who was in the field and I was like an inside sales engineer. But since I came from support, like I knew the product better than anyone else who was a sales engineer. So he would often call me when he would run into technical stuff and I would be like, oh no, just do this or try this. Or I would like troubleshoot the stuff for him, right? When he was out in the field. So because of that, we just kind of like built this relationship.
Mhm.
Um, and then he started to give me like particular pointers. So it just kind of like naturally developed. And to me, the best mentorships are the ones that naturally develop when you kind of have a natural chemistry. And then like there's an inclination in the person that they it's kind of mutual, but they want to help you. Um, and you end up going to them for help. So that's the best way to do it. I know some people say just approach somebody,
Mhm.
but mentorship, you know, when you find a true, like if you really want true mentorship, because a lot of people are just looking for somebody, we call that like an accountability partner, right? That's not like a mentor, but just, hey, hold me accountable. Here's my goals, et cetera. Tell me if I'm doing the right thing and maybe hold me accountable a little. That's what a lot of people look at mentorship as. Whereas true mentorship is essentially somebody who is not only going to hold you accountable, but they're going to look at like your purpose or your goals and visions. They're going to look at your strengths. They're going to look at your weaknesses, and then they're going to like map out a strategy with you, right? Not only map that out, they're going to walk it out with you. So that means however that looks, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, they're going to have like check-ins with you. They're going to be invested into your growth just as much as you are. And they're also going to leverage their name to get you into positions. So that's what real mentorship is. And that type of mentorship is more qualitative, which means that you can't have as many mentees because you're so
Mhm.
invested in that person's life.
What do you say? A common thing that I hear when people are looking for mentors, or a piece of advice I hear, is to for the mentee to kind of do something
Mhm.
in exchange for the mentorship. So, maybe you're a good writer and you write some emails or something for the person.
Mhm.
A lot of people could feel like, why would I be doing free work? Or B, feel like they don't really have anything that they could contribute to this person who is in their mind and, could be light years ahead of them in their career and experience. What advice do you have around that? Is that good advice? If you do think it's good advice, how can someone identify what skills they have to contribute to the relationship?
Yeah, I think I'm not, I can't, so I say that's the first time I've like really heard of that. That somebody wants you to like invest like more so to the actual mentor, like do something for them. I don't know if that's like to do something to prove to them that you're capable, or if that's doing something to like benefit them. So I can address both. Um, if you're just doing something to show them that you're capable, I think that's okay, right? Like you want to put in effort. Most people want to know that this person is serious, right? So if you're doing
Mhm.
things where you're putting in effort, you've done research, like you kind of have somewhat of a strategy and a plan, like to the best of your ability, like that shows somebody that you're serious, right? And then you don't mind helping that person. But the opposite, if they're talking about doing something that actually helps out the person that is supposed to be the mentor, that's kind of selfish. So I wouldn't. I think that doesn't really make much sense because a mentor relationship is almost, like parent guardian, and you're just helping them develop. So we don't make our children do stuff to help us. So I wouldn't recommend that part. That's probably not the mentor you want.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard it as far as just, especially if it's someone that you are approaching, maybe you guys don't have any type of relationship established already.
Mhm.
I've heard it be kind of leveraged as like an icebreaker almost, like, hey, um, I noticed that you do these graphics. Here's something I do. Um, would you be willing to, have a coffee chat? I'm looking for a mentor, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
almost say that's too strong. Like you're coming along too strong. Like
mhm,
you want to actually build that relate because it's a two-way fit, right? This person may be an expert in the field, but they may not be an expert at being a mentor. So you want to make sure that they're good at teaching, that they're going to be good for what you need in your role.
mm,
So you really want to, like we would with a company during the interview process, you want to get to know that person. You want to see, okay, is this person, do they actually, are they patient? Do they do a good job of breaking down information? Like, are they actually invested? Do they have the time? You want to like investigate all these areas before you essentially ask them to mentor you because that's very important. Your mentor can be a great asset to your career, right? But the wrong one, right, can just be a hindrance and kind of hurt your confidence, right? I mean, it's nothing you can't rebound from, but
mhm.
it just wastes your time. Like they could waste a few months of your time, and you can really save yourself that by, doing some legwork first to make sure that while this person may have credentials and seem cool, like on Twitter or in tech, conferences, that's one thing. But okay, how are they? Are they personable, right? Because how they talk to you in this vulnerable position of you not knowing is going to do a lot for your confidence, whether making it or breaking it.
You brought up a really good point. I think a lot of people, especially online, they see the big names, they see, you're doing all this stuff in the community
Hmm.
and automatically think, yes, I want you to mentor me.
Hmm.
Um, can you dive a little bit deeper into just some traits that people should watch for people that they want to mentor them?
Yeah. First and foremost, are they personable? Like that's the first. I know that seems simple, but if they're personable and just kind of friendly to approach, that's going to make a big difference because they have to create an atmosphere of safety because you're going to go to them in this I don't know position and I want to learn. And it's very important that you feel comfortable asking questions that may seem silly because you're trying
Mhm.
to grow and learn. If they're not personable and if they're not someone who you can feel, where you can be in that teachable state, you're gonna have to go in there with your ego out, with pride, like, oh, I know this. And you don't really know. So you're not really going to get the growth and learning out of it because you don't want to feel embarrassed, right? So you don't want that type of person. So I think first and foremost, are they personable and do they create like this comfortable environment for you to learn, right? Is it easy to talk to them or do you feel nervous to approach them? Are they rude? Also, how is their time management? Like, do they actually have the bandwidth to take someone on? Because if there's somebody who does have that big following, right, as well as like maybe a big career, maybe they don't really have time to mentor you. So that means that you may not get that level of investment for them. So you have to see, all right, how responsive are they, right? And that's not saying like how some people are weird. Like if you send a message and they want you to respond like in 5 or 10 minutes, but like, does it take a day? Does it take days, weeks, or do they just never respond? Those are things that you want to look for to see, okay, if this is going to be a good experience versus if it's going to be a bad experience. I mean, there are other things too, right? But um, they don't really have a way to test to know if they're like really technical. So all you can do is maybe ask a few other people who also may be a little bit more senior to ask around and see like, hey, is this person really knowledgeable? Is this stuff accurate? I would do some of that kind of stuff.
Okay. For once you find a mentor, what is your advice for mentees to kind of get the most out of that relationship versus coming and just dumping on the person, like, I don't know where I'm going. What am I supposed to do? Tell me what to do.
Mhm.
How can they be a little bit more productive in getting what
Mhm.
they need out of the relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that first and foremost, you want to be a little strategic with your own life and career as much as possible. Like you want to have like a roadmap or a blueprint, right? Even if it's a little broad and not as, laser focused as it should be, like seeing the fact that you've put in thought and that you have like a plan, like a career plan. Like some people have like a cert trajectory of I want to have these many certs within this years, or I want to be maybe start off in like as a cloud, or a SOC analyst, or focus on being like focus on cloud. Then I want to grow into being like more infrastructure team, et cetera. So having some of that, but taking it back, if they don't know those positions, maybe they just say, hey, I want to be in the security field, right? And here's the steps I've taken. I just know I want to be in the actual security field. Having some form of a strategy, I think you can get the most out of it. Also, going into it being very open and honest, right? And
Mhm.
letting your ego be at the side because you're going to learn, right? So it's not, you don't have to prove to this person that you belong.
Mhm.
No mentor should be trying to make you prove that you're good enough to be in tech. Um, so your ego should be at the side because this is when you're learning, as difficult as it is. And I think a lot of us in tech struggle because we want to know, right? We hate not knowing. So
Right.
it drives us to research, it drives us to put the work in. But in learning, we also have to be humble enough to allow people to see us not know and to ask a question that may seem, a little stupid. And as long as they don't treat us like we're stupid, we're okay. So I would just say leave your ego as much as possible at the door, especially if
Mhm.
you got the right person. They're not going to make you feel bad. They're going to build you up because you're a reflection of them.
Well said. Um, One thing I noticed that was a little disturbing on the Twitters a while back
Mhm.
was the concept of paid mentorship.
Wow.
Now, to me, if I am paying you for career guidance, I look at that more as a career coach, a
Right.
life coach, a personal development coach, whereas mentorship is more, to me, charitable.
Mhm.
Have you ever worked with a coach versus a mentor? What would you say to people who are kind of, because it kind of makes sense. You're taking time out of your life to quote unquote mentor me. I should
Mhm.
be able to compensate you. What would you say to people who are they're falling into that line of thinking?
I would say be very careful. Do your research up front. Know what you're getting into. There's nothing wrong with people who are career coaches, and if they're transparent and if they just come, like if a person, say if myself and you, if I was coming to you and you say, hey, look, I'm a career coach. I actually charge people to work with. Like that's fine because I've laid that expectations up front, and then it's on me whether I want to take it or leave it. Now, whether you're valid or not, it's kind of hard to know, but I've been honest enough to tell you that, hey, this isn't a labor of love, right?
Mhm.
I also think that people, especially in the Black community, like there's like there's a responsibility to give back, right? And when you find people who've made it, they often voluntarily give back because they know the hurdles that are ahead. They know the challenges. Rest in peace to my brother Paul Brazier. He was big on mentoring. And that's because when you're in certain rooms and you don't see us, because it's either a more affluent position higher up, it makes you want to help and it makes you want to give more people the blueprint who are actually going to do something with it, right? Like you just don't haphazardly just give out the blueprint. But if you see somebody who's working towards it, you gladly give it to them for free.
Mhm. Okay. I want to shift the conversation to the mentors now.
Mhm.
Um, what advice would you give for mentors who are, maybe looking to take on their first mentee, or how to structure that relationship a little bit
Mhm.
better? I know for me personally, I've mentored a couple of people, and initially it was a struggle.
Mhm.
Beyond just, hey, I have these ideas. This is kind of the plan. This is what I want to do. And then it kind of took on more of like what you mentioned earlier, an accountability role. They
Mhm.
already had their plan. They wanted my feedback on it. I gave it, they adjusted accordingly. And then it was just kind of keeping in contact with them while they worked that plan. In hindsight, I definitely feel like I could have better structured that relationship.
Mhm.
But again, I'm new to it. So
Mhm.
what advice would you have around that?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, give yourself grace because you're going to be learning something new, right? So I tell the mentor to give themselves grace. I'd also say, it's very important when you're mentoring someone to really study and learn that person, because the goal is not to recreate and replicate yourself. It's to get
Mhm.
the best out of them the way they need it. So they may learn different than you. You have to be willing to study that person. You have to be invested enough to understand what's the best way for them to gain knowledge, what's the best way to communicate knowledge. You have to put that level of effort and detail into it to really getting to know this person. And that's why you really need to build a very strong relationship, so that you can know them and know exactly how best to lead them. As a leader, you need to know your people, and everybody learns different. Everybody um, receives information different. And if you don't take that initial time, um, your mentee is going to walk away sometimes because you may be delivering stuff that's offensive, or makes them feel like inferior. And then they essentially won't actually, they'll say, "Hey, I got it." They'll reach out less and less or just ask more surface level questions. So I say you equally as a mentor, you equally want to make sure that you're getting to know the person. So, I mean, honestly, this may seem a little far fetched for some people. I'd see if they have done any research from like the mental health aspect to see like what their attachment style is. Right, there are 4 different styles. Understanding that about the person will make it so much better, right? Because then you can know how they receive info.
Interesting. I never thought about it from the mental health aspect. Can you dive a little bit deeper
Oh yeah.
into that? And not only just in mentor relationships, how does that affect, at work and relating to your coworkers and trying to like, move up
Mhm.
and stuff?
Oh, this is like my passion right here. So absolutely. Um, so I'd say so attachment styles is not a new concept, but it's essentially when we're born, we make a secure or we make a connection with our parents, right? Now, ideally, this is a secure, good connection, right? It's loving, mom and dad. But that isn't everybody's reality.
Mhm.
And it's not bad if it's not your reality, but if it's not our reality, we learn how to deal with that and approach the world in very different ways, right? So if and some of it is cyclical, right? Because that parent didn't get to make the good connection with their parents, and it's just a cycle, right? So generational, essentially trauma, essentially what it is. But what happens is because of that rejection or abandonment, like we can form like different ways that we approach people, we interact, different ways that we deal with things, right? So we can become there's secure attachment, which is good. There's fearful attachment. There's avoidant attachment, and then inside of avoidant, there's fearful and dismissive.
Mhm.
Um, and each one of those essentially is a way to deal with like fear and rejection or abandonment, right? And it's just how we actually process it. So, for instance, an avoidant attachment is going to, if you hold them accountable or point out something that they may need to improve on, they're going to take that as criticism and rejection. And they're going to shut down and withdraw. And if we don't know that about the person, and if we're giving them good, kind, constructive feedback, they're going to shut down,
Mhm.
right? That also translates to being in positions of management. Like you inside of tech, you've seen it. People who are good at their job usually get promoted,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean they're good at management because now it's a different problem you're solving. Now you have to solve people. Like it's not technology. Like a manager's job is people, 80% people. So, and there's not a lot of training for that. So you go into it attacking it like I'll be just as good at technology, but it's people. And if no one's taught you how to relationship build, no one's taught you how to learn people, no one's taught you to kind of study the different approaches that people have, and they're not going to readily say, "Hey, I have like okay, prime example. When people talk about in job interviews or just in general, we were, being a perfectionist is almost like a badge of honor, right? Like, hey,
Mhm.
I'm a perfectionist. It's a lot of us, I mean, myself included. That's like, oh, I love putting my all, I want to get it right. Strip down perfectionism beyond that is a fear of rejection. Because if I'm perfect, you can't reject me.
Right.
And if you don't know that about your mentor or mentee, right, or your person that's under you, right, you could be critiquing them and not seeing that. Look, beyond that, you kind of just have to let them know that, hey, don't let great stand in the way of good. Like good is what we want. We may want great sometimes, but sometimes good is all we need, right? And that doesn't make you any less. And that doesn't make your work any less valuable. Approaching it that way is much better than saying like, oh my God, you're procrastinating, you're taking all day on this project. Like, I can't believe you are, this is the deadline. I haven't seen the update. You just have to know your people. So
Right.
that to me, that plays a role, like from the mental health aspect. Like it's not every manager. Some managers get it, and some
Mhm.
mentors get it.
What led you to start just kind of studying this?
Um, which part, the attachment theories, or just mental health in general?
Just mental health in general and how it relates to our working
Yeah, I mean,
lives.
I think it really started with my own life and wanting to improve, and seeing that as a man, I didn't know how to process these feelings or emotions that I had inside of me. Right, like I grew up in the hood, and I'm from Detroit. You didn't get a chance to process nothing. Nobody taught you nothing. Like we had like two feelings: be cool or fight. Like that's all we could express. Um, and since I was, changing my life around, I couldn't be out here fighting. I was grown.
Mhm.
So I'm like, man, I need to learn what to do with these feelings inside of myself. So I started to do that, and I was actually going through a divorce at the time, and I was like, man, I have all these things that are inside of me. I don't actually know what to do with it. So I started out writing. Um,
Mhm.
in therapy, they would call that narrative, right? Because it essentially bypasses like the logical part of your brain and gives you the opportunity to just be honest, right? So I started off just writing, and then from that, I went from like writing to some of my stuff was just like journaling. I would journal prayers like to God because faith was important. So I
Mhm.
mixed in elements of faith. Like this is something that would be conversations with God. Some of it would just be me voicing it out. So I did that. And then I realized that I started to share some of my stuff with people. And they're like, man, this really helped me. And so I went from doing it for me to also doing it to help others. And I saw like there's a huge need. And then it made me want to help other people like navigate as I learned how to work through these things like emotions. And I started to want to help others because I realized that not a lot of us have, had the opportunity to have someone explain what anger feels like or what grief feels like or what fear feels like and how to process it, right? And we all process it differently. I mean, obviously, I'm a big advocate of therapy, and so I did therapy. I read a lot of books on it because more than anything, I think that people aren't bad, and in general, a lot of it traces back to childhood trauma that we're unaware of. It's like carbon monoxide, like
Mhm.
poison. You can't smell it, but like you've got like childhood trauma mixed with like emotional neglect, which all of us kind of have, because if you read the books around it, you doggone near have to be perfect in every scenario with your child for them not to feel neglected. And nobody's going to get that.
Gotcha. All right. You probably already touched a little bit on this, but what would you say is the key to thriving in your tech career?
Yeah, I would say a few things. One, I think my faith is there, right? I'm grateful. Like I've always been held in favorable positions by people, and I I think that's because God favors me. I think another thing is being where I'm from has created like this tremendous drive and hunger. I mean, you from Baltimore, you get it.
Hmm.
And when you grow up in certain conditions, like the drive and the work ethic is relentless. I mean, um, so that's been a part of it. Just being really smart and curious has always helped me. So I think all of those things combined has, and really being driven, like having goals, and like each year I'll set a goal, right? And I like to accomplish it. So it's not like I'm competing against anybody else. I'm like racing towards my goal for the year. Like that's always helped me. Like I've always had like something that I'm striving for. And the fact that I don't compare myself to people has been really like the recipe for my success.
You mentioned something that I think a lot of people feel and end up struggling with. So
Mhm.
that drive and hunger and just need to be successful. Did you ever have times in your life where you struggled with kind of balancing that and just, falling into quote hustle culture unhealthily?
Oh my God. Yeah. 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 So the grind culture, hustle culture. Um, yeah, I fell into it pretty heavy, like, working a lot of hours, like pushing, striving. Like I was working a lot of hours. I was also trying to launch a book, which I ended up launching, and doing like the mental health thing on the side. Um, and I was trying to be all things to all people. And I burned myself completely out, like completely out. And rode on E for a while. And through that, I got some revelations of the importance of vacation, the importance of taking time off from work. Um, those lessons I learned, obviously, some of them were painful because my body would shut down sometimes. I get sick,
Mhm.
or I would just be so tired I couldn't do it. Like, I would go into like I would only take vacation like at the end of the year, like those 2 weeks or the week or so. Like one time I remember I could barely get off the floor, right? Because I had just given that much. And I'm like, this isn't smart. Like I'm gonna kill myself if I don't stop.
Mhm.
S- So that's kind of, and then seeing that and realizing like, wow, we're glorifying things that don't matter, right? Like these things don't matter as much as we think they do, right? And some of that is like having people close to me pass away and realizing like at the end of their life, seeing how your life is summed up, like nobody wants to be defined as a great one. Nobody's like they made every Zoom meeting, right? They, I mean, they were a great worker. Their emails were thorough. Like no one cares about that stuff. So I'm like, I gotta find a balance so that I can equally enjoy my life. And I started to attack rest. I started to see rest as productive. And
Mhm.
this actually goes back to something you said earlier about the mental health aspect of it. We glorify the grind culture and the hustle culture because a lot of that is rooted in trauma. Because if we stop working so much, if we take time to sit still, we have to face us. We have to face what we've been running from. And we don't want to do that. So instead, we'll work until we're so exhausted that we sit down. Because if we don't, now all the stuff that I don't know what to deal with is sitting me in the face and I don't know how to face it. So I use work as an escape.
Mhm.
So I learned how to deal with myself so then I can enjoy rest.
So um how do you kind of balance things? I think it's safe to say that there are definitely, seasons in
Yeah.
our life where you're grinding. Like that's
Yeah.
just what it is because you're trying to get to, a major goal. For those kind of like off seasons where you're just, you're in the flow. How do you kind of balance that work time versus leisure?
Yeah. I think so. I had a good friend. She was a CISO for this really big company. And I asked her that one time. I said, how do you balance it all? Right? She's a mom, wife, CISO. She's VP now. I'm like, how the heck do you back? She's like, you don't. She's like, you harmonize it. I said, what's the difference? Like,
Mm.
doesn't that sound like balance? I'm
Yeah.
like, why are you being deep? I'm like, what's the difference? She was like, you harmonize it and you learn to prioritize certain things. It's almost like you said, in certain seasons of your life where you need to invest more and prioritize work, you do. But If that's not one of those times, you make sure that you prioritize, rest, getting off at 5, setting setting little things for yourself, like, hey, I'm not going to check my email after this certain time, right? Like you have to force yourself, like, all right, I'm really done at 5 or 6 at work, right? Especially if you have a family, because you got to kind of pour into them. So, all right, look, at 5:30, I'm done with work. So from 8 to 5, you can have me. Now, there are seasons, to your point, where you may have to go over, but as a consistent expectation, I stop at 5. Like my boss where I'm at, he stops at 5, right? He's got kids, he goes to make dinner, he does that. But from 7 to 5, he pours everything into work. But after that, he's done. So to me, I'm like, all right, cool. I put a time regulation on myself. I don't check emails after a certain time. Then I allow myself to take days off without feeling guilty. Especially if you work remote, like people don't realize that's a trap, because you're like, oh, I'm working remote. I can just not
Yes.
schedule a lot of work and have it. No, your mind needs to know, I have no responsibility today, no work. I don't even need to look at that phone. That's still important, because it's easy to fall. I fell into that trap, and I'm like, I'm actually still tired. So
Hmm.
that's how I did it. But
I'd also I'd also add to that having some sort of separate workspace,
yes, yeah,
which was very hard. I think a good portion for pretty much the whole pandemic, my workspace was in my bedroom. That was a terrible idea. Never do that.
yeah, yeah. You're right.
Put it, ideally, if you have a basement or a garage or something or a spare room,
Mhm.
that would be ideal. But at a minimum, work in your dining room if you have to. Just separate those rest spaces from work spaces.
That's a really good point. It brings up a thought that I kind of forgot that I did. So I had I have office now too. So in my old home, like I had like a perfect office, and what I would do is, it was like off to the corner or whatever. I work in there Monday through Friday. I close that door. I put
Mhm.
all my work stuff in there. I also have 2 phones. I have a personal and a work phone. That's also important to distinguish, because when I look at my phone, I don't want to think about work.
Right.
So I would put my work phone in there. I'd power it off at 5 p.m. on a Friday. I close that door, and I would not go in there until like maybe Sunday night, right? So that I could walk away. I think that's, to your point, I also still do that. And then I don't go in that room. Like if I'm off on Friday, or if I have an off day, I don't go in that room. That's mentally the best way that I learned to deal with it.
Um, you mentioned something about just coming from a disadvantaged background and just feeling like you can't not work. Um, a lot of what I see online with people, um, I guess cert chasing is a good way to describe it.
Mhm.
Um, they just have to get whatever the new hottest thing is. So, and I think we saw that kind of evolve over the pandemic. It was
Mhm.
Salesforce, it was cloud, it was cyber. And there were a lot of people just chasing whatever, that top 10 certification list, whatever the cert that they were
Mhm.
talking about that week, that's what they were chasing.
Mhm.
Um, and I think a lot of that is also out of pretty much survival mindset.
Mhm.
What advice do you have for newer people who, maybe they're still in that mindset to just kind of, slow down and pick one or two things to kind of focus on and kind of build out like a strategy for themselves versus just chasing the next quick thing?
Yeah, I would tell them to look at their career as like building a home. You have to lay the foundation first, before you hang up the drapes and before you finish the kitchen. So, meaning you need to like get some foundational knowledge, right? And that means that you have to take it step by step. Like your career has phases. So map out your career in phases. Like this may be phase one. Phase one may be you need to understand what the heck like core networking is, right? Like, all right, whether you want to be in security, cloud, I need to understand the protocols that are getting exploited, the ones I need to protect. Like, I don't even know what a protocol is. All right, so you kind of need to start there. And then just build from there, right? Like, what does it look like for your interests? Like, forget what the popular cert is. What's your interest? Like, focus on you, focus on what your interest is. People online, you cannot follow people online because that thing switches like the weather in a bad state, right? Like one moment is this,
Yes.
the next minute is that, but that's no clear definition of like what the goal is. If you focus on your goal, it doesn't matter. If somebody thinks just the certs are cool, but people want experience, right? And if you don't know what you're doing with it, like it's not going to matter because when they put you behind a keyboard, if you can't produce, you and your cert gonna be on the door. Um, so it's better to get the actual process, learn how to implement what you're learning, um, and make sure that that's really aligned with the route that you want to go. Like it's okay because part of it's just taboo. Like, okay, well, I'm studying so hard this weekend, or I'm doing blah blah blah. Like that's all part of grind culture. These people, some people are right, but some people feel like, well, in order to fit in, I need to say I'm studying. No, that's not normal. Like, go live. Like, go to the movies, bro. Like, go out with your fam or your kids. And go hang out with your people.
Mhm.
And then focus on your goal. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't compare yourself to that. Stop comparing your progress. Have a vision. This may be where a mentor is important. Have a vision, work with your mentor, and stay in your lane. Don't worry about the lane next to you. Stay in yours. Focus on the insight of what's at the end of your lane. And that's how you'll have the most success. And that's you won't be chasing cert after cert because that stuff may not even help what you want to be in your career. So what's the point of
Mhm.
doing it? You're just wasting time.
Agreed. And definitely to your point about spending time with your friends and families, you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Correct.
Um, and I think we, when we're in that grind mindset, it's very hard to step away. Like you almost feel guilty, like,
Mhm.
oh, I should be studying, I should be doing something to enhance my skill set. And to your point, that leads to burnout.
Mhm.
You now, whereas you could have, strategically took a day off,
Mhm.
a weekend off here and there. Now you're, especially if it manifests in a health problem, now you're down for a week or longer, and you
Mhm.
just kind of set yourself back. Because one thing about your body is if you don't rest, it will rest for you.
You ain't lying.
And it will pick the time, the day before the exam, the day before you start the job. It will pick the most inopportune time to do it. So definitely, plus one everything you said there.
You are right about that.
So I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Where can people find you, your book on the interwebs?
Yeah, thank you. I have too. It's always good to talk to good people and talk about subjects that are helpful. And seeing the work that you're doing in the community, right? Like, in the cyber community is definitely helpful. So I appreciate it. So you can find my book at www.wordswontform.com. Again, that's www.wordswontform.com. And if they say, hey, I don't really like to read, they can also buy a journal. Like I have a journal and a pen. And maybe they just want to start the process of like putting out their feelings, like the paper. Like maybe you don't actually need the book. Maybe you just need your outlet. So they can also, I'm also Words Won't Form at IG, and Beeline Ron on Twitter. So they can find me at all those places.
All right. And if you missed that, all of those links will be below in the show notes. Thank you again for coming on and supporting me. I really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.